Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free Palestine!
Picture this. It's December 2023. In the bustling streets of Nairobi, thousands of Kenyans march through the capital carrying Palestinian flags, chanting, "Free Palestine!" The president, William Ruto, has just declared Kenya's solidarity with Israel, but the people are telling a different story. Similar scenes unfold across the continent, from Dakar to Lagos, from Cape Town to Addis Ababa. But here is what is striking. While most of the world debates the Israel-Palestine conflict through the lens of religion or geopolitics, Africans see something entirely different. They see their own story. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating geopolitical alliances of our time. Why does an entire continent with 54 nations and over 1.4 billion people stand so overwhelmingly with Palestine? The answer isn't what you might expect. The historical roots, when liberation movements united. To understand this solidarity, we need to travel back to the 1960s, the golden age of decolonization. Imagine you're in Algiers in 1969. The air is electric. With revolutionary fervor, the Black Panther Party has just held a press conference alongside the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the Pan-African Cultural Festival. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. This was the birth of what scholars call liberation internationalism. The idea that all struggles against colonialism and apartheid were connected. Here is the fascinating part. African liberation movements didn't just support Palestine in words. The PLO literally trained in African countries. Angola, Mozambique, Tanzania, Algeria. These became military academies for Palestinian fighters. In return, Palestinian revolutionaries shared their urban warfare tactics with African guerrilla movements.
We identify with the PLO because, just like ourselves, they are fighting for the right of self-determination.
Nelson Mandela, the icon of liberation, captured this perfectly when he said, "Our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians." This wasn't political rhetoric, it was lived experience. The ANC and PLO shared training camps, weapons, and strategies. But there's an even deeper connection that most people miss. The apartheid parallel, Israel's uncomfortable alliance. Here is where the story takes a darker turn. While African liberation movements were supporting Palestine, Israel was doing something that would forever shape African perceptions. It was supporting apartheid South Africa. The numbers are staggering. By 1979, South Africa had become Israel's largest arms customer, accounting for 35% of Israel's military exports. But it went beyond weapons. Israel helped South Africa develop nuclear weapons, shared intelligence, and even provided military advisors. Think about the psychological impact of this. African freedom fighters were literally fighting Israeli weapons in the hands of their oppressors. When South African forces attacked ANC camps in Angola, they were using Israeli equipment. When apartheid police suppressed townships, they were using Israeli tactics. Ronnie Kasrils, a veteran of the anti-apartheid struggle, puts it powerfully. We South Africans fighting apartheid had a special affection for the Palestinian people. We read Palestinian poems in our training camps. We had their posters on our walls. This created what I call the mirror effect. Africans began seeing Israel's treatment of Palestinians as eerily similar to apartheid South Africa's treatment of black South Africans. The political dimension, Cold War chess moves. Now, let's talk politics. During the Cold War, African nations had to choose sides, and most chose the Soviet bloc, not because they loved communism, but because the Soviets supported their liberation struggles while the West often backed their colonial oppressors. The Palestinian Liberation Organization became an observer at the Organization of African Unity as early as 1974. This was unprecedented. No other non-African organization had achieved this status. It sent a clear message. Palestine was considered part of the African family. Revolutionary leaders like Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso were explicit about this connection. In 1984, he told the UN General Assembly, "I think of the valiant Palestinian people, the families which have been splintered and split up, and are wandering throughout the world seeking asylum." But here's what is really interesting from a geopolitical perspective. Supporting Palestine became a way for African nations to assert their independence from Western powers. It was a form of diplomatic rebellion. The emotional and cultural connection. Let me tell you about something that Western media often misses: the emotional dimension of this solidarity. For ordinary Africans, the Palestinian struggle isn't an abstract geopolitical issue. It's personal. Take the story of Mutaz Azaiza, a Palestinian photojournalist whose Instagram following exploded from 25,000 to over 18 million during the recent Gaza conflict. Who were his most engaged followers? Young Africans who saw in his story their own experiences of displacement, oppression, and resilience. In Kenya, when President Ruto declared support for Israel, Buka Omole of the Communist Party of Kenya immediately likened Israel's occupation of Palestine to Britain's historic colonization of Kenya. This wasn't political theater, it was genuine identification with shared experience. The cultural connection runs deep too. In many African languages, there are now songs and poems about Palestine. Street art from Johannesburg to Lagos depicts Palestinian and African flags intertwined. Social media hashtags like Africa for Palestine trend regularly across the continent. For modern context, votes, protests, and digital solidarity. Let's look at the numbers that really tell the story. In UN votes on Palestine-related resolutions, African nations consistently show the highest solidarity rates globally. When the UN General Assembly endorsed the New York Declaration on the two-state solution in September 2025, it passed with 142 votes in favor. Almost every African nation voted yes. But it's not just official votes. Since October 7, 2023, we've seen massive pro-Palestine protests across Africa. In Nigeria, 50,000 people rallied in Lagos demanding their government cut ties with Israel. In Kenya, despite government support for Israel, thousands march regularly in Nairobi, Mombasa, and Kisumu. In Senegal, lawmakers and civil society groups regularly organize solidarity marches in Dakar. In South Africa, the government didn't just protest. They took Israel to the International Court of Justice for genocide. The digital dimension is particularly fascinating. TikTok and Instagram have become powerful tools for African youth to express Palestine solidarity. Videos of African students drawing parallels between their own colonial histories and Palestinian experiences go viral regularly. One video that went viral showed a young Nigerian woman saying, "They took our land, they took their land. They divided us, they divided them. They called us terrorists when we fought back. They call them terrorists when they fight back. This is not about religion. This is about recognizing oppression. The counterpoint: complexity in the alliance. But let's be honest, this isn't a simple story. Africa isn't monolithic, and neither is its relationship with Israel. Israel has diplomatic relations with 44 African countries. Countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, and Ghana have significant trade relationships with Israel. Ethiopia alone sees over $100 million in annual trade with Israel, focused on agriculture, technology, and security cooperation. Morocco and Sudan have even signed normalization agreements with Israel as part of the Abraham Accords, though Sudan's agreement has been suspended due to ongoing civil war. Here is where geopolitics gets complicated. Many African governments find themselves caught between three competing pressures. 1. Popular sentiment that overwhelmingly supports Palestine. 2. Economic opportunities that come with Israeli partnership, especially in agriculture and technology. 3. Western diplomatic pressure to maintain good relations with Israel. Take Kenya as a perfect example. President Ruto supports Israel officially, but his parliament and people regularly condemn Israeli actions. This disconnect between government policy and popular sentiment is common across Africa. The future implications: what this means for global politics. So, what does African solidarity with Palestine mean for the future of global politics? First, it represents the emergence of what scholars call Global South Solidarity, a coalition of formerly colonized nations that increasingly vote together in international forums, often in opposition to Western positions. Second, it's changing the narrative around the Israel-Palestine conflict. For decades, this was framed as a Middle Eastern or religious conflict. African voices are reframing it as an anti-colonial struggle which resonates globally. Third, it's creating new diplomatic alliances. The recent establishment of the Pan-African Palestine Solidarity Network in 2022, with participants from 21 countries, shows this isn't just spontaneous support, it's becoming institutionalized.